Hey everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be my Game Week 14 team selection. We've just come off a brilliant, very fortunate game week with the free hit. We got 75 points. That sends us to, I think, 19,000 within the world, 818 total points. The one thing I'm regretting a little bit is I wish I was a bit poorer. I wish I could have a slightly better auto sub than Senesi for Salah. Definitely got the minutes wrong there, but it's nice to get the Gakpo minutes right, because I think that was a considerate choice in terms of either going for Gakpo or Bruno and kind of changing the structure. Now, the only thing that I'm sort of regretting is I, close to the deadline, was considering doing the kind of stacking maneuver of tripling up on Aston Villa defense. So I was considering Collins to Dean and Rodgers to Dang on the deadline. I just didn't feel super comfortable about it. You know, I've owned Dean the Troll in the past. Dango's minutes on some games were quite poor. And maybe I should have anticipated that there would have been a little bit more rotation around Arsenal. But, you know, we got the minutes call wrong there in terms of Dango, and I don't feel bad about owning Collins. Collins had two huge big chances within this game week. Rodgers did absolutely nothing, so I can't feel too bad about that. And yeah, 75 points, as I said, is extremely lucky. My team is not remotely close. And yeah, I just have to be happy about this game week because people triple captain for nothing. And not everyone obviously has Foden and Thiago as their free transfers for this game week. So I just have to know, or I do know in my mind that it was just a fortunate game week, and you just have to be happy about something like that. It feels good to be in the position that I'm at in this season. But yeah, let's just quickly move on towards my own team. So looking at my team right now, I've got Richards, Lacroix, Virgil, and Raya. I think I've got a perfect three at the back defense for this game week, even though Senesi is suspended, which I'm pretty upset about because I think Senesi is the type of player where if you miss this Everton at home fixture and you kind of look at the Bournemouth fixtures as a whole, the only time I'm really going to play Senesi over the next few game weeks is going to be Burnley at home, and that's not really good enough. I want better fixtures for a player that's actually, more expensive than Richards or Anderson within my own team, and simply, these are players that I can play every single week almost. Whereas with Senesi, I feel like that's not really the case. Yes, of course, it's nice to know that he can get DEFCON when they absolutely, concede 3 to 4 goals, but they're still also conceding a lot. They've, as a team, for example, in underlying stats, become a bottom half defense, whereas teams like, for example, Palace and Fulham still sit in the top half and have sort of trended better, I would say, from a defensive point of view. And we know Bournemouth's fixtures get worse, right? So that's kind of why I feel like Senesi is going to be a sell. It might not be this week for me because I actually own Senesi at 4, or I bought Senesi at 4.4, so I can tank one price drop, and I think he will drop at least once because, of course, a lot of managers are going to be shopping for a defender that they can play this week. In my case, I'm still eyeing up Nico O'Reilly as a transfer replacement. That obviously means I need to cuff up some cash somewhere, but I think Senesi to O'Reilly makes the most sense for my team at this moment in time, and I'm kind of looking forward to making that move. I just think O'Reilly's one of the most aggressive fullbacks within the league. I think as much as people rate Munoz, if you trust, I guess, O'Reilly's minutes, and obviously there's the usual caveats with Pep, but Ryan Knight-Nuri's gone for a few weeks in AFCON, and those actually coincide with some really good City fixtures. I think Senesi has to go for me. Other than that, I love my defense. In the midfield, look, I can't start Dewsbury Hall for a good sort of, haul for my life, right? I am going to start him this week. I think it is not a great game. It's Bournemouth away. There were poor fixtures that I didn't start him for, like Man United away on paper. I'm sure obviously people can laugh about Man United and their performances, but you can see even on a week like this, if you really wanted to make a narrative that United's bad, I don't think they're going to go out there and beat Palace at Sellers Park. So yeah, United did the job. Was a bit jammy as well. I didn't own Bruno for the free hit, but fair play to people who went for Bruno on the free hit or even just owned him in general. Mbeumo's been, poor in terms of converting as of late, but I think the underlying stats in that game actually show that Mbeumo's still a very exciting pick to me. And I'm looking forward, of course, for West Ham at home. There's nothing really to be said there. I think my captaincy is actually split between the two of them, but we'll talk about that in a moment. Saka still feels great. Got an assist versus Chelsea in a very tough match. And I think obviously from a league table perspective, that's massive for Arsenal because it seems like Chelsea's probably the most competent challenger at this moment in time. I watched them in midweek versus Barcelona and I was really impressed. Just the way that they pressed and just completely overwhelmed Barcelona was impressive. And I thought that was probably going to be a tough match for Arsenal despite Arsenal sort of dispatching Bayern Munich with ease. And I think home and away is just so significant. And going back to sort of some of the logic of free hit, I can be honest and say free hit 13 was extremely lucky in terms of how the outcomes felt, right? Generally speaking, like all the results that a free hitter within the free hit template wanted kind of fell that way. But you also have to just be honest and say, like, these are the types of fixtures you do target, right? Like, if there is a single bad Arsenal fixture, it was Chelsea away. And I think at Stamford Bridge, honestly, Chelsea played incredible. Even with a man down, I thought they won a lot of second rebound duels. They always had a man open within the middle. Reece James and Neto were brilliant. Arsenal were not at their, tippity top today, but they still look incredible. Semenyo for me is fantastic as a player. I'm intrigued to just own him for Everton at home, and then I can kind of call it a day after that. I feel like with Semenyo, the main thing is, Chelsea now looks like a tough fixture in Gameweek 15. Chelsea just look like a really solid defense. United away, I think, is a poor game. Just because, I don't like away fixtures. Burnley at home is obviously incredible, but maybe actually someone like Mbeumo in my own team, like, he could just be Semenyo, and I could do a little bit of a yo-yo type transfer. I'm not sure if that's ideal, but maybe I'll revisit Semenyo if I sell him in the next game week, and I'll talk about that in terms of my plans. But generally speaking, I'm kind of eyeing up both Semenyo and Senesi as outgoing players for City players that I actually really liked on the free hit that I want to own, right? Players like Foden, players like Nico O'Reilly, who I don't really want to own these players for Fulham away, but I'm very much looking forward to owning them, as I said, for Gaming 15 plus. With Dewsbury Hall, I will try hard to start him and get some points from him, but I've gotten 0s and 1s so far, or 2s, and he's not been getting that recently. He's been getting a lot of points. He's gotten a lot of really good underlying stats too. I think if you see like most of the matches that he plays, there's occasionally games where he racks up to like 0.59, 0.6 XA, which is really impressive. I think as a creator within the league right now, these types of numbers are very solid, and at that sort of midfield price point, there's no one else who does that on a creative level. In terms of XG, that's been ticking up, right? So this is the best performance that he's had to date in terms of the finish that he had versus Newcastle, but just the position as well is good. And in a way, he's sort of also a player who we didn't get to see last season within Chelsea. So it's always hard to say, how does this player fit within the Premier League? How do we profile this player? How do we set expectations for this player? I will say that the market odds that I've seen for the season-long bets before Dewsbury Hall started scoring any goals after his Game Week 1 goal were actually quite high. So I've always felt good about owning Dewsbury Hall. But as you guys know, I haven't owned him for any points. With the front line, just to end on a closing note in terms of sort of reviewing how I feel about my present rolling team, I think the injury for Sarr is so significant for Mateta, because whilst Mateta is a cash cow for sure for Game Week 16 to move into Thiago, and I think everyone loves Igor Thiago, they also love Dango because Dango just gets penalties all the time in the Premier League, which means that Thiago gets to take them. But I think that Sarr injury just means that Mateta's minutes are going to be that much more stronger. And something that I'm thinking about, of course, is just the standard question of like, do I think Mateta's actually better than Thiago? And right now, of course, Thiago's had better numbers in terms of goals compared to Mateta. But of course, we know the XG thing is real with Mateta. It's just that he's kind of had his own Darwin-esque season, Jackson-esque season, if you want to put it like that. Like, he's had a lot of chances. He's actually not converted all of them. He's taken some of them. Fortunately, he also converted his most recent penalty today versus Man United, so I think that's quite significant. But I'm now thinking about just keeping Mateta, if I can afford to keep Mateta, is basically my point, right? I mean, Burnley at home is passed for Thiago. That's the best game on paper. The next best game on paper is going to be Leeds at home in Game Week 16. But I'm not sure if I necessarily need to kind of cross over and sell. I think it just comes down to, whether or not I'm going to have enough money in the bank. So that's something that I'm deliberating right now within my team. But that's, how I feel about my team, the transfer landscape going forwards. Generally speaking, one thing I wanted to mention is that I think if you're making transfers this week and you know that you've got 5 free transfers in Game Week 16, this is the week you make transfers because you want more Arsenal players. If you're saving transfers this week, I feel like you're investing for City players in Game Week 15. That's almost how I feel about it, right? Because if you look at the fixtures for both Arsenal and City, it's a perfect yo-yo. City will have in Game Week 14 a tough game, Fulham away, then a great game, Sunderland at home, then a poor game, Crystal Palace away, then an amazing game, West Ham at home. Whereas with Arsenal, obviously, it's a tough game here, in my opinion, or a great game here, in my opinion, with Brentford at home. Then Aston Villa away is definitely a tough game. Wolves at home is an amazing game. Everton away, I think, is a tough game on paper, right? I know this. There have been some teams that have actually gone to sort of play Everton away and actually done really well. And I did sort of mention that it's interesting, like after they've moved away from Goodison Park, like how they've struggled a little bit at home recently. But, I don't want to use that as a narrative right now. I just think when you look at the fixtures, that's kind of how I feel about it, right? It's like a yo-yo structure. So to me, I think I'm fancying the City players a bit more. And that's what's encouraging me to roll. But at the same time, I also feel like some of the transfers that I'd be making this week to get an Arsenal player, something that I've actually considered is if I do Senesi to Timber now, I can also do Semenyo to Minte. So that's interesting in terms of just getting me Timber. But I feel like I'm just not really in the mood for this transfer. I almost think there's some uncertainties with Timber and whether he can start. There's a lot of narratives I think you can play through this where it's like, I guess Timber's just been so fit, he can hold out until Club Brugge where White can start the Champions League match. The alternative, I guess, also is, you can mention that backline for Chelsea wasn't exceptional. So why would you make it worse versus Brentford if Saliba's still out? And I kind of get that as well. And then obviously, like, Timber's just exceptional once again, right? Like, I mean, like, even in the dying stage of that game versus Chelsea, he really could have scored the goal that would have actually let Arsenal win. And once again, the Arsenal fixtures are never going to be as worse as Chelsea away in the short distance. So why would I not just go Timber now? But I think the thing that I don't like about it is I think so many people have been selling Semenyo, and I think this is a really good fixture where Everton have still conceded a lot of chances recently. Why not take Semenyo versus Everton at home? We still don't really know how Fabian Hersel is going to treat some of these midweek fixtures. Maybe it's an early Minte sub. I don't know if that's the best Minte game as well. I feel like Aston Villa are probably a slightly better defense than Everton so far this season. And then obviously there's the gulf in terms of the attacking quality. So is that really that beneficial? At that point, it's Semenyo and Dewsbury Hall for me compared to, let's say, Timber and Minte. And whilst I think obviously Timber and Minte is better on paper, it is 2 free transfers lost, and it means that I can't get towards the City players that I want in the next week. So that's kind of why I want to wait. And that's why I'm going to line up exactly like this within my team selection for this game week. But just before we jump into that, I am going to quickly run through the match day odds. So this is supported by 11fi.com. You can find his odds all the time, but 11fi has a great team strength rating model, which I really do back. This week, though, clean sheet odds are top for Arsenal, no surprise. Then Liverpool, which I'm sure a lot of people have some questions over. I think there's an aspect to, how good are Sunderland on the attacking phase and how good are this Liverpool team after they've kept 1 clean sheet versus West Ham. I guess structurally they played a little bit different versus West Ham, but you've also heard the slot quotes that Salah's going to play anyways. And I guess if you think Salah gives other teams an edge in terms of attack, that's not going to be present, I guess, for Sunderland. But I will just, play Virgil on the basis that it's a home game. I don't know if the attacking gulf of the fixture is actually quite so good. Personally, and I think Sunderland have just found like magical ways to score every single match, and they've honestly racked up really solid XG for the most part, so I've just been impressed with them. I know I tend to criticize their attack, and I guess if you took away the penalty, maybe the XG versus Bournemouth wasn't that good, but still they're finding a lot of ways to score through second rebounds, set pieces, things like that, and you can only credit a team that's doing that. As far as, let's say, other clean sheet odds, I think it's actually a decent week, just to simply say this is maybe the last good week for Crystal Palace from a defensive point of view. A lot of us have been buying Crystal Palace defense, on end, but I do think that outside of game week 18, there's not too many great Crystal Palace fixtures left from a defensive point of view. Maybe 17 is also quite good. You could say 19, but I think 15 and 16 are particularly poor. And then it does tend to be a little bit more mediocre because obviously like a Burnley away fixture is incredible. We've just come through Wolves away. I think there is a bit of a change in terms of in the few weeks or a few weeks into the future, we're probably going to be shopping some other players outside of Crystal Palace defense. And I think, even myself as a manager who owns 2 Crystal Palace defense, that's a consideration for me where, I probably need to open my eyes to maybe selling some of these Crystal Palace defenders because I might not be fielding so many of them going forwards. From a goals perspective this week, I think the only thing to mention, of course, is Liverpool have an extravagant number. City's not that high, but I think Chelsea, their kind of XG from a modeling point of view has looked really, really good. So I feel like this is a pretty good game week for people to just hold on to their Enzos of the world, their other sort of Chelsea attacking assets. I can't include Caicedo there. Plus he got a red card, which I think was deserved. Not that I'm here to give you commentary on red cards, but Yeah, I feel like actually Chelsea have been just more impressive than we think. I think they're a team that, from a team rating perspective, I tend to think, we would find that over the next few weeks we would probably appreciate them a little bit more. And yeah, I think like I do feel bad about selling Enzo, but I don't really regret it because of course I do own Man United versus West Ham, and I'm looking forward to that game because West Ham, I think, actually defended decently versus Liverpool, but it was obviously a low chance creating affair. Like it's not like Liverpool gave away a lot of chances. West Ham certainly didn't pry too hard versus Liverpool, and Liverpool weren't creating an aggressive amount of chances like they usually tend to do, which I think Slot's philosophy when a lot of these big new sort of signings were bought, I think, was sort of to just outscore as many of their opponents as possible. And they simply haven't been able to do that, right? Even though in some games they had better XG, they just didn't really prove that out within certain matches. Like PSV, I think, is another perfect example of that, where they outscored PSV on XG, but you just can be honest and say that PSV still found it extremely easy to kind of break through this Liverpool defense. So not too much to be said there. I think Newcastle are embarking on a great run of games, so players like Thiago are interesting from a defensive point of view, and Spurs obviously look extremely toothless, honestly, on both ends of the pitch. So this is a great game for Newcastle. I think also getting the fullbacks back will also increase the Newcastle expectations from attack. So that makes Walter much more interesting. That makes Barnes more interesting because he's actually, the Newcastle player who's been extremely in form. But I still think the concerns are still there with regards to minutes and things like that, just because these are players who compete on multiple competitions. So, for example, I think Barnes was still substituted at 71 minutes, which unfortunately just isn't good enough, right? If you're sort of picking FPL assets, I feel like someone who gets subbed at that sort of time with no penalty share is still not someone you really want to be invested into. Whereas there's a lot of other both teams to score type games this week, which would be like things like Brighton versus Aston Villa and, Wolves versus Forest as an example, just in terms of you're not expecting for one team to completely dominate the affair. So that's kind of how I feel about the match week odds. I think it's interesting in terms of like a transfer perspective. Like I think this is a week where you hold off maybe on the Chelsea transfers and wait for next week. As I said, I think there's the Arsenal and City element of, if you want to invest more into Arsenal, do it this week. If you want to invest more into City, wait for next week and use your transfers there. This is a decent Brighton fixture, not exceptional, and I think this is a fixture worth keeping your Bournemouth players for if you have them. But those are kind of my thoughts. And then Newcastle, once again, another team that I think absolutely you'd consider from a transfer perspective. So for my own team, in terms of how I'm going to field my team, I'm going to play Raya, Richards, Lacroix, and Virgil. So that's 2 Crystal Palace versus Burnley away, Virgil versus Sunderland at home, Raya versus Brentford at home. In the midfield, I'm begging that Dewsbury Hall does well, so it's going to be Bournemouth away, Semenyo, Saka, Bruno, and Mbemo. And, there's not too much to be said about this, right? I kind of bought Mbemo for this, and it cost me a lot of points 2 weeks ago. I'm hoping that it's going to reverse it a little bit in my favor, although Munoz can hurt me once again, I guess, with his performance versus Burnley. I just have to hope that, if Collins can get some great chances from a set-piece perspective versus Burnley, hopefully Richards and Lacroix can do the same thing here. Now that I said this, I guess Guehi can probably do it instead. But yeah, I really like the Semenyo game. I think it's nice to know that he's back. There's also the question on pen share, because I think Kluivert's very close to coming back, and he's going to take away all the pen share potentially for at least the minutes that he's going to play within a game. But I'm still curious to think about Semenyo versus Tavernier and who's going to take the penalty next. I really think it's Semenyo, which is kind of why I'm convinced that holding Semenyo is probably going to give me some fruitful dividends, but I could be wrong. But hoping all the best here for Semenyo, who was very unfortunate to not get any points in Game Week 13, and I think has kind of exacerbated transfers, even though he still looks like an exceptional pick within the game. However, obviously we've got the shiny new toy sort of impact here with Foden, and he's obviously coming extremely hot. Haaland and Mateta are super simple plays. Once again, I think the Sarr injury just makes Mateta this much more interesting of a prospect this week. It's such an obvious play now. And I do feel bad for other managers who, own Sarr. I think that's tough. Like, it's even tough to think about what midfielders to go into, but I think Minte and Anderson are probably the most obvious midfielders that I would shop at a sort of cheap price point. And then Haaland, has been cold recently, but I don't think we should really let that get in the way of thinking that, Haaland's sort of fallen off. Like, if anything, the only recent games that he's really struggled with would be the Leeds game and the Aston Villa game. But he also kind of struggled within the Brentford match and still scored within one match, or within that sort of one chance that he had when he kind of manhandled Van den Berg. You know, you can't perform at the craziest level ever. His underlying stats are still, on average for the whole season, absolutely incredible, and nowhere, you know, within the distance of anyone else. But it is still Fulham away, and Fulham have actually crept in there in terms of non-penalty expected goals conceded to become the third best team within the league in terms of defense. So I feel like, you know, when I look at, you know, this game week as perspective, I think captaincy is not going to go for Haaland. I am the type of manager who's comfortable going against Haaland captaincy. I will not be going Haaland captaincy this week. I think it's between Bruno and Saka for me. And because I feel like Saka's minutes could be a little bit dicier this week, when I think about it, the next game for Arsenal is Aston Villa away, and that's going to be a tougher game. If I can see, for example, a match like, let's say, Bayern Munich, where Saka can get substituted in a drawn game state, in a game that they probably still wanted to win, I almost feel like if there's a lead for Arsenal, that this could still be a Saka early substitution, just if, let's say, Arteta's going to manage his minutes a little bit more. On the flip side, Bruno had that sort of potential hamstring injury. I think he's fine, but that's also why I'm rolling, right? I want to see exactly what's up with Bruno. We won't get any quotes on Bruno, but I think that's why I kind of like the idea of captaining Bruno and vice captaining Mbeumo, because if Bruno isn't going to be on the pitch, then Mbeumo's going to take penalties over Bruno. So I feel like whilst captaincy could actually be between Saka and Bruno, I kind of like the idea of just captaining both Bruno and vice captaining Mbeumo to kind of get the full coverage of the Man City penalty share. If there's any sort of surprise Bruno news, and you know, like, you know, we get surprised or bamboozled by that. With Anderson and Krupi, I have a really weak auto sub this week, like in terms of bench, but there's not much I can do. Something that I've thought about is, you know, maybe I can make a free transfer like Senesi to Malik Thiaw from Newcastle, but does that really sound that exciting? Does that make my moves for game week 15 a little bit more hamstrung? I'd rather have three free transfers in game week 15 than two free transfers in game week 15, right? So that's why I feel like I can probably skirt that move and just hope for the best with, you know, all these players playing within the midweek fixtures, which are always a tough ask. You know, there will be surprise rotations, but yeah, I'm holding Anderson and Krupi Jr. can kind of hold me over the line, and that's pretty much it. That's going to be my team selection for this week. Captaincy, as I said, going to sit on Bruno Fernandes and vice captain on Mbeumo. That's it for the video. Let me know what your thoughts are. Do you also like some of the alternative moves that I've suggested, right? For example, do you like the Timber plus Minte move, or do you think it's too aggressive? Do you like waiting for the City transfers? Do you like the Malik Thiaw move, even if it's a little bit side grady? And I think all it really achieves is to bench Dewsbury Hall, which, I don't know. I would like to be a part of the Dewsbury Hall business. So let's see. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys soon. Take care and goodbye.